Let's go to Salena Zito. Hello, Salena. How are you?
Hello, sunshine. How are you?
Very good. You sound tired. Been working hard?
I sound like I have a Tallulah Bankhead thing going. That's called spending a lot of time on the road and talking to a lot of people.
Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. You're the Washington Examiner national political reporter. You are also a columnist for the New York Post and the co-author of The Great Revolt, which explained what happened in 2016. You get it because you actually talk to people. You wrote an amazing article that has just come out, the painful story on how John Fetterman arrived at Tuesday night's humiliation. I read it on the air just last hour. I want to get to that, but I first want to get your reaction on what are people saying? What are the voters saying? What's really happening on the ground there?
Well, it's a funny story. I drove all the way out to the debate from Pittsburgh to Harrisburg. I got there, realized that the only people I would be watching the debate with was other reporters. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to learn anything here. Drove all the way back, halfway across the state, and stopped in a bar and just sat back and observed people watching the debate. And I think the most powerful thing about watching those reactions was watching the realization on their faces that they had no idea that John Fetterman was in this bad of a condition. Well, they understood because he would do a rally here and there, spoke a couple times. They understood there was somewhat of a problem, but they thought it was speech related as opposed to cognitively related. And when he was put in a position where he had to answer questions and provided all the tools available to him, and he still struggled, they now realized nobody has been telling them this. I mean, I have, Dasha Burns has, but that's about it. All the other reporters have just omitted that this is an issue. And so as they were talking among each other, they were really frustrated and angry at my profession for not demonstrating exactly what the problem is and being honest about what they've seen over the past couple months, but also really mad at other Democrats like Senator Bob Casey, who has stood on the dais with him in about a half a dozen events, maybe more, and talked about how terrific shape he's in. And he even had the audacity to go on national news after the debate and said he did a terrific job. Then you add that with the Philadelphia Inquirer saying that he won the debate and CNN saying he won the debate. And you add all that together and there's this sort of invisible and quiet thing going on with voters saying, y'all are gaslighting us and we're tired of it.
So is it going to change the way people, we are so set in our camps now that I wonder if anything would change anybody's mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Will this change their mind?
I saw it happening in real time. Look, one of the things that was so important about the book, The Great Revolt, it was that it was understood, this coalition and this conservative populist coalition that formed long before Donald Trump ever stepped on the stage and remained intact. You look at Pennsylvania in 2020. So what happened? Joe Biden won. Joe Biden won barely. What people did not talk about was that there was a significant red wave down ballot in the congressional races, in the statewide row office races, in the state house, in the state senate. That coalition remained together, once again proving that this was not about Trump, but it was about their lives, their communities, and how they are impacted. And I think that remains to be the underlying or the story that is consistently missed in reporting. And I'll give you an example of that. The other day, did you see the Kentucky coal miner who went to the basketball to watch his son?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. By the way, that's something I see all the time. To me, that was like, yeah, I mean, that's what people do.
Right.
But, everyone was like, oh, my God. But that image started to be shared across social media at the exact same time that the Washington Post wrote a story and that said why rural Americans are so angry and resentful and why they're voting Republican. And I thought, this is the perfect example. These two moments together of how my profession does not understand the very people that they're covering. That coal miner was not angry and resentful that he had to go to the game like that. He was appreciative that he had a job to go to and the ability to leave that job and go sit in a basketball game.
Yeah. So you bring up so wait a minute, before I go on to this. The polls show that Oz is now up 2 to 3 points. In normal times, I would have expected that to be 6, 7, 8. But who knows? What are you thinking about? Is Fetterman going to win? Is there going to be enough space between them?
Look, here's the challenge for Fetterman. And by the way, I would say it's been a challenge. I've been reporting this since mid-September. Dr. Oz, who I was incredibly skeptical of in the beginning when he first announced he was running, has actually proved and matured as a very good candidate, someone who goes into those places, as I call the middle of somewheres, and talks to the voters that nobody thinks about, and he listened to them. I have logged on thousands of miles on the back roads with Oz, watched him in rural areas, watched him in majority minority areas, just listening to voters, where, by the way, no other reporter would be. So he's not there to get a photo op. No one's there. I'm there. And he's actually doing it because he wants to understand what the issues are. So that was a long way of telling you that I have always thought that John Fetterman was losing voters incrementally, but losing them. Remember, he was up 12 percentage points.
Yeah.
But he also has no ability to gain voters. And it's not just based on his illness. I've been doing, I don't know if anybody's reading it, but I've been reporting that as mayor, the whole sort of elevated story that you saw in the Rolling Stone and the Atlantic and New York Times, these glossy, beautiful pieces about how he saved this borough in southwestern Pennsylvania. I've been covering him since 2005. He didn't save that town. He was barely ever there. He didn't attend the events. He really had very little power to begin with. Crime went up. Population declined, and the heart and soul of that town, the hospital, where there was the only sit-down restaurant for people to go to in the cafeteria, was torn down. I hope people go to SalenaZito.com and read the reporting that I've been doing.
Yeah.
I know I'm not on social media, but that reporting has been there for months.
I saw the story on that when it came out. And how do the people of the town feel when they're hearing, "Hey, he saved our town"?
Well, that was the beauty of that story. That wasn't me telling everyone that. That was them saying that. They talked about how their town didn't get better. They talked about no jobs coming in. They talked about the people that have fled to get out of there because there's no hope and there's no opportunity. And they talked about it always being just about him and never about them. And they talked about him going after one of their neighbors, a young black man who was jogging, and he put a shotgun to his chest and kept him there because he thought he was some sort of
criminal.
Because he thought, and by the way, that young man's life has been destroyed. That young man's life has been destroyed, and he has never been apologized to. Or the kind that he went up to a local bar, a nightclub, owned, by the way, by a black entrepreneur, and changed the wording on the signs at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a camera caught it, saying that it was closed and not opened because he deemed it unworthy to be opened in the town. These are the stories that people of Braddock will tell you, not the stories, not me saying this. This is them saying this. That's why I think that reporting is so important, let alone that he didn't pay his taxes in the poorest school district, in one of the poorest school districts in the state. He didn't pay the school tax. And, it frustrated me every time all these glossy stories were put out there, with him standing in front of a steel mill. At the same time, his parents were paying for his education. Paying for his family's lifestyle.
It's amazing to me. He reminds me of, in many ways, Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a horrible human being that never paid a dime of his own way. He practically bankrupted his parents. He lived off his parents and then his family for his whole life. Never really accomplished anything.
Oh my gosh. That's astounding. Yeah. I can't even imagine not wanting to have purpose in your life in that way, other than the purpose of power, which is what I believe that this has always been about. Okay,
so Salena, hang on just a second, because if you could hold for 1 minute, I want to do a commercial, then come back, and I want to talk to you about the press and the Democrats that have stood by. It's what you brought up in your latest article in the Washington Examiner, and I'd love some answers on what do you think is really happening there. We'll go to Salena Zito, return with her here in 60 seconds. Okay, so we're talking to Salena Zito. SalenaZito.com is her web address, but she writes for the New York Post and also the Washington Examiner. When in 2016, when you nailed what was happening, you were the only one that the media went, how did she get this so right? And you wrote a book about it. You went to work for CNN as a contributor there. And I know you, Salena. I know you probably walked in at first hoping that people will actually listen and get it. And then they didn't. And thus they're down the toilet even more. Why are they not looking? Why are they not exposing things like Fetterman? Are they afraid? Or are they afraid of being ostracized by their own group? Or is it that they just won't do it because they're on the bandwagon?
Oh, so I have an entire chapter about this in my book, and I think that it's probably the one that people should really, really read. It's called A Culture Craving Respect. And the problem with my profession is the same problem that you see in corporate America, in major news organizations, but also in institutions and governments, but also even in sports organizations, in that the people in the boardrooms are all come from they all live in the same super zip codes. What do I mean by super zip codes? The wealthiest counties in the country. Mm-hmm. They all went to the same great schools. Now, they may have come from Iowa, but they left that far behind once they got to D.C. or New York. And so what happens is when they go to, whether it is write a story or do a commercial or make a boneheaded decision like the NFL did and let Colin Kaepernick do whatever he wanted despite having a contract that said you cannot do this, is because they are so disconnected from the people who read their stories, who buy their tickets, who sit in their seats. That is the larger problem, right? That's where the problem begins. It began at the same time where more companies kept buying up smaller companies, so there's less local connection to the people who buy your products. But also local news organizations started to shutter. And so people had to gravitate to buying their items and or reading their news from places that don't know them. They don't know anyone that sits in a pew every Sunday. They don't know anyone that says a prayer before dinner. They don't know anyone that owns a gun. They don't know anybody else that uses a gun. And so because of that, when they plop into a place, they seem like a freak show. They look at the people and say, y'all are a freak show.
I have 1 minute. The reporter that her job was threatened, I mean, she was just beat up by everybody from NBC. Yeah.
Great reporter.
And she folded. Was that a message? Did everybody who was covering this know clearly how bad Fetterman was?
Yes, they did. I watch them watch the same things I'd seen. They knew. They always knew.
Did they?
Sasha Burns is a very good reporter, and I will sing her praises forever because she has kept on that story, and she continues to keep on the story. I would keep an eye on her, and I think it's interesting that it's a young woman and a 63-year-old grandma that only have the nerve to write this stuff.
Okay, well, one last question, 10 seconds. Fetterman going to win or Oz?
So.
What?
I think it ends up being Oz.
Oh, I hope you're right this time. Thank you so much, Salena. God bless, and we'll follow your reporting. SalenaZito.com.